Well, wristwatches don't just tell time anymore, do they? Have you seen some of the commercials for watches these days? I mean, technology has burrowed itself into watches. Chances are you are wearing one of these watches. And if you're not, we're not judging this morning. We're just making a comment. They can play different music from watches. You can receive and send text messages from watches. You can talk to people on your watches. You can search the internet on your watches. You can pay for things with your watches. You can download apps on your watches. Watches don't just tell time anymore, do they? Well, not too long ago, several months ago, I did something that, in hindsight, was a terrible idea. I enjoy running, so I was looking for a new watch to use when I run to track mileage and things like that. And so I went to Google. This is my mistake. I went to Google, and I typed in best watch to use when running. You ever done something like this before? And you click search, and it gives you page upon page upon page of an absurd number of reviews of watches. I mean, we're talking about information I didn't even know I needed to consider. We're on these different web pages that told me that this was part of the watch buying experience, to analyze every single caveat of every single watch ever made, all the shortfalls, all the features, all the pros, all the cons that I needed to look through in order to make an educated decision on which watch to purchase. And you're looking at me like I'm crazy. Well, some of you are looking at me like I'm crazy, but you've done this before. I know you have. You've done that, and especially it happens with big purchases we make, right? Something that's going to cost us maybe a little bit more than usual. A kitchen appliance, or new flooring, maybe a new car, or a vacation destination that we want the ins and outs of everything. We want all the information. We want all the details. We love information. And we want to be able to be in the know. We want to analyze things back and forth, up and down, left to right, right to left again, all over the place. We want to know what we're getting ourselves into. And what should have been an easy decision of picking out a watch to figure out how to use when I run, it took quite a long time to actually make a final decision, to which my wife, in her immense wisdom, said, just pick one already. And she was right. I say all of that because it seems to me that John chapter 2 is a setting that wouldn't sit too well with us. In our age of information overload, in wanting to know more about more people and more things and more stuff in our lives, because there are very few details and information here in John chapter 2 when a crisis is about to take place, especially at a wedding feast in Cana. The wine runs out. That's all they know, no more. The wine runs out at a party. We say, big deal. Serve something else. Go to the store and buy some. Something's open. Or if you run out of wine, then serve another adult beverage. Soda, tea, coffee, whatever. Just let the party keep going. Wine's not a big deal. But in this day and age, first century Palestine, it is a huge deal. Because at this time, it was thought that wine was the equivalent of God's grace upon the people in that place. So when wine ran out, it was as if God's abundant joy was being pulled back from the people gathering there. So much so, it reflected so poorly on the host family, and I'm not making this up, that guests could actually take out lawsuits against the host because it was as if they were withholding God's grace from them. That's not a good way to start out a marriage. And yet that's where they are. And yet in this moment of not quite sure what to do, when to do it, and how to do it, Mary realizes that an incredible man is standing in that place, her son Jesus. You see, Mary has had 30 years of watching Jesus operate. And I would imagine that in those 30 years, she started to figure out, this guy is special. Besides the fact that the angel said, this guy is special, Mary probably figured that out too. And that's exactly where she goes. She doesn't know how he's going to do it. She doesn't know what Jesus is going to do about it. She doesn't even know if Jesus is going to act at all, but simply goes up to Jesus, and Mary says, they have no more wine. That's all. Statement, not a question, statement. And after a short conversation, Mary says to the servants at the wedding, statement, not question, do whatever he says. That's it. And they do it. And this is where the active faith of Mary and the servants at the wedding feast are put on full display for us to see. because they just go forward with trusting that Jesus is going to do something in a place of crisis. And he does. In their obedience, these servants and Mary, they get a front row seat to the power of Jesus as Jesus miraculously turns water into wine. And to give you a perspective as to how much wine is there, we're talking about close to 900 plus bottles of wine. That's a lot of wine. That's not Jesus running out to the 24-hour Walmart and getting a couple bottles and bringing it back. Jesus does something exceptional. And there was an overflow, an abundance of wine in that place. Here's the thing, though. Active faith for us and Mary and the servants here, active faith, it is not overlooking the information that we have before us. As if listening to the advice of a well-trusted friend or a doctor and saying, I think you're wrong. I'm going to do my own thing. Thanks for the time, but I'm headed in a different direction. No, God placed those people in your lives to tell you things that you need to know. Active faith is not foregoing all of the information that we have, but it's realizing and it's trusting that God works independently of how we think things are going to work out. Make sense? That God's capability of working in our lives is not bound to what we know. Sometimes we have control issues. More often than not, we have control issues. And it's hard to let go. And maybe that's why it's so hard to trust Jesus sometimes. Maybe that's one of our biggest hang-ups in trusting Jesus, because we want all of the details spread out before us like we're searching for a new running watch. We want to know everything that could possibly happen before we actually trust that Jesus is going to do what he says he will. We want to know what to say, when to say it, and how to say it before we say anything at all. Why? Because we don't want to look foolish. Because we might get our words tied up a little bit. We might do the wrong thing, and yet we don't speak at all. We don't act at all because we don't have all the details and all the information that will appease us. And what that does is it rips our heart and our eyes away from God's providential goodness in our lives. That God continues to remain with us and in us just as he does the people around us. And this is where information can so greatly fail us, because we start to see other people and see other situations as if they are products for us to purchase. And essentially what it comes down to is in order to see if they're worthy or not of our time or our energy or our actions or our words. And that's a devastating place to be, because that willfully neglects God's work in the world and in our lives through us to other people. I will gladly admit that I read far too many articles on running watches. In fact, if you have any questions on running watches, I will be glad to help you out with them. That is an embarrassing thing to say. But finally came to a piece of advice that really helped me out, that I realized something in this whole process, as silly as it is, that I got lost in. I got sunk in all this information, all these comparisons. And the advice was this: before you look into the details of a watch, make sure you know what activity you're using it for. In order to get the best watch for whatever you're going to use it for, you got to know what you're using it for in the first place. And I realized that I was analyzing things that just didn't matter. I wanted to use it for running, for tracking mileage, for the GPS, to see my little route all over the place, all over different roads. That's what I wanted it for, to keep track of time and get better at running. But what I started to realize is I was comparing ways that phones can pay for things. And I don't know if you know about running, but when you're running, you're not buying anything. And that was one of these details that I started to factor in, something that in the end wasn't even going to matter. The same thing with apps. Downloadability on your phone or on your watch with different apps and things. I started to look at what was more efficient in downloading these things. And then I finally realized I'm not even looking at my watch when I'm running. I started to think through all these different things, and it sunk me to the point that I was analyzing and getting so worked up over things that just didn't matter. That can happen in our lives too. And so often it does, that we get so sunken down in things that just don't matter. And we lose the activity of Jesus in this world. We lose the mission that Jesus has sent us on into this world, to be his light shining in the darkness. Done. And Jesus says, honor the Lord with all of your heart, soul, mind, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. But we want to know how. We want to know when. And we get lost in all of these different details, and we miss out that it's Jesus who does the sending, not us. That it's Jesus who does the giving and providing, not us. That it's Jesus who works through us to effect change. You see, that's what Jesus is doing here. And John doesn't want us to lose the sight of that God's mission in this world, in Jesus, is to purify us, to cleanse us, to restore us. It happens in John 1 that the light of the world came into the darkness of this world to purify, cleanse, redeem, restore the people here, even when some of those people weren't even going to recognize him and pushed him away. We get a huge hint of Jesus' mission in this world in this moment in John chapter 11. John chapter 2, verse 11. This is the first of his signs, John says, implying that there's more, that Jesus did in Cana in Galilee. Why? To manifest his glory. He wasn't trying to make the master of the feast look really, really good. To manifest his glory there. That's why he did it. This miracle isn't just a really cool party trick. It's so much deeper than that. And we know that just from the jars that Jesus used. And let me explain. These jars here in verse 4, 5, 6, somewhere in there. It's in John chapter 2. Trust me, we just read it. That these 6 jars are used for purification, okay? And in Jewish custom and culture, what would happen is that these jars would be used to clean things that were dirty in order then to place them back in the presence of a holy and pure God. So say, for instance, if your utensils fell on the ground, you would put them in these jars of purification, and then they would be essentially clean to be in the presence of a holy God and pure God again. So you need to clean dirty things in order to make them clean again. Not too revolutionary. However, those are the jars Jesus uses to change water into wine. It would be like you having friends over for a party and guests and using the bathtub to serve punch. Right? The guests wouldn't leave forgetting that. They would have said to themselves, "That's not normal." Which is exactly what the servants would have picked up on as well. This isn't normal. Jesus is saying dump out 180 gallons of water and fill them back up again to the brim. That's not what wine is served from. But for Jesus it is. And that's what happens. The servants, they dip into those jars of purification. And at that point, all they know is it's water. They put it in there. And they take it over to the master of the feast. And the master of the feast's eyes light up and he goes, "Where did you get this?" Do you really want to know? The jars of purification. Where did you get this? This isn't normal wine. This is premium wine. This is the good stuff. Nobody does this. You see, Jesus is situating himself among them as the one who purifies his people. Out of something that wine should not have come from comes an abundance of it. And from a place of death where life shouldn't come from comes an abundance of it. You see, the servants would have looked at these jars and gone, "Are you kidding me? From there, you can provide abundance?" Kind of like some people can look at the cross and go, "Are you kidding me? Life can come from a place of death?" And yet that's what happens. Why? Because Jesus uses ordinary things in this world in extraordinary ways. And maybe that's you. Maybe that's you. Here we see Jesus as the one who stands in the place of forgiveness for us. We see the one who purifies us to stand in the presence of a holy and pure God. We see one who cleans dirty things and makes them new again, you and me. We see one who cleans off those who are tarnished and presents them to the Lord worthy and pure. That's you and that's me. And all along the way, all along the process, Jesus doesn't gather information about us and say, "Well, you're not doing so well as them over there," or "You're not doing so well as them over there." No, he just does it. Paul in Romans says that while you were still sinners, Christ died for you. Isaiah in Isaiah 62, which we read this morning, says that it was God who looked upon you with joy and glory. That's his direction toward you right now as his people. It's he who cuts through our hesitation when we don't really know what to say to other people, when we have a privilege to speak joy and love and his grace to other people. He cuts through all of that. He says, "Speak, I'm here." He holds out before us these common elements, bread, wine, for the forgiveness of our sins, when we don't really all the time know how it is strengthening our faith, and yet it is by the power of his word in our lives. He stands with us in moments when we don't have everything figured out. We don't have the details around us. We don't have the information in different moments, even though we so desperately want them. He stands there. And when all of that inevitably fails, our plans, our desires, our dreams, the way that we think things are going to work out, when all that fails, it's Jesus who still stands as our firm foundation. When all the walls come tumbling down, Jesus still remains, and he's with you now. Coming to John chapter 2. Like Mary and the servants, it's nothing more than leaning on humble active faith in Christ. It's nothing more than we as the people of God taking our place at the foot of the cross, realizing that we don't have all the details and information about life, but that's okay. Taking our place at the foot of the cross, looking up and simply saying this, God, you've got this. When I don't know what's going on, God, you've got this. Amen.